Did you know that wolves change rivers? Not metaphorically, not as a side effect of living near water. Wolves, by simply existing in a landscape, physically alter the course, depth, and shape of rivers. The mechanism connecting a predator to a river is one of the most extraordinary chains of cause and effect ever documented in ecology, and it was proven in one of the most famous natural experiments in scientific history. This is the story of what happened when wolves came back to Yellowstone, and what it tells us about how the natural world actually works. In 1926, the last wolf in Yellowstone National Park was killed. The gray wolf had been systematically hunted across the American West for decades, regarded as a threat to livestock, a danger to people, a problem to be eliminated. By the mid-20th century, wolves had been eradicated from most of the continental United States. In Yellowstone, they were gone entirely. What followed over the next 7 decades was a slow, largely invisible catastrophe. Without wolves, the elk population had no predator capable of controlling it. Elk numbers climbed, and elk, when they have no reason to fear anything, do something that destroys ecosystems. They stand still. They graze in one place, in the most convenient places, riverbanks, valley floors, open meadows for as long as they want. They eat everything. They eat it down to the roots. They come back and eat it again. The vegetation along Yellowstone's rivers and streams disappeared. Willows, aspens, cottonwoods, the trees and shrubs that held riverbanks together, that filtered water, that provided habitat for dozens of other species, were grazed to nothing. Without root systems holding the soil, riverbanks eroded, the rivers widened and shallowed, the water ran warmer, fish populations collapsed, songbird populations collapsed, beaver populations collapsed because beavers need willows and the willows were gone. One missing predator, absent for 70 decades, had cascaded through the entire ecosystem. Not dramatically, not visibly year to year, slowly, quietly, the way a foundation crumbles before the building falls. In 1995, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reintroduced 14 gray wolves into Yellowstone. They came from Canada, transported in crates, released into a landscape they had never seen. Wildlife managers knew it was a significant ecological intervention. Nobody fully anticipated what would happen next. Within months, something changed in the elk. The elk did not disappear. The wolves did not reduce the elk population significantly in the first years. 14 wolves against thousands of elk barely registers as predation pressure numerically. What changed was behavior. The elk knew the wolves were there, and that knowledge, that reactivated awareness of being prey, changed where the elk went and how long they stayed. The places where elk had grazed freely for 70 years, the riverbanks, the valley floors, the open meadows where a predator could approach from any direction, became dangerous again. Not impossible to use, dangerous. The elk still used them, but they moved through them faster. They grazed and left. They stopped standing in one place, eating everything down to the roots. Ecologists call this the ecology of fear. It is not the direct killing that reshapes an ecosystem. It is the behavioral change in prey species that the mere presence of a predator produces. The predator does not need to catch the elk. It needs to exist. The elk's threat assessment system, dormant for 70 years, reactivated, and the landscape began to recover. The willows came back first. On the riverbanks the elk had vacated, willow shoots emerged from root systems that had been suppressed for decades but never fully killed. Aspens followed, cottonwoods followed. The vegetation that holds soil in place, that filters runoff, that shades the water and keeps it cold, returned along the riverbanks and valley floors the elk had abandoned. The beavers returned. Beavers need willows for food and construction. With willows reestablishing along the rivers, beavers moved back into Yellowstone in numbers not seen for decades. And beaver dams change rivers fundamentally. They slow water flow, creating ponds and wetlands. They raise the water table in surrounding areas. They filter sediment. They create habitat for fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. Each beaver dam is a small ecosystem intervention on its own. The wolves had brought back the willows. The willows brought back the beavers. The beavers began rebuilding the river system from the inside. The songbirds returned. Willows and aspens support nesting populations of migratory birds. As the vegetation recovered, bird species that had been absent from sections of Yellowstone for decades reappeared. Researchers documenting the recovery counted species returning to areas where they had not been recorded in living memory. The fish recovered. Colder, shaded, cleaner water with restored bank vegetation and beaver-created pools produced conditions suitable for trout populations that had declined severely during the wolf-free decades. Fish numbers increased measurably within years of vegetation recovery beginning. And then the rivers changed shape.
This is the part that stopped ecologists cold. The rivers of Yellowstone, the physical channels, the bends, the banks, the course of the water through the landscape began to change. Not because the wolves had touched the rivers, not because any direct physical intervention had occurred, because the vegetation holding the banks in place had recovered, because the beaver dams were altering flow rates and sediment patterns, because the entire hydrology of the system was responding to the return of biological processes that had been absent for 70 years. Rivers that had widened and shallowed during the wolf-free decades began to narrow and deepen. Meanders, the bends and curves of a river channel, reformed where erosion had straightened and degraded them. The channel stabilized. The water ran colder and cleaner. The physical geography of the landscape changed because a predator came back. This process has a name. Ecologists call it a trophic cascade. A trophic cascade occurs when a change at the top of a food chain, the addition or removal of an apex predator, sends effects cascading downward through every level of the ecosystem, producing changes far beyond what any direct predator-prey relationship would predict. The wolf does not eat willows. The wolf does not build beaver dams. The wolf does not reshape rivers. But the wolf's presence in the system sets in motion a chain of behavioral and ecological changes that ultimately does all of those things. The Yellowstone Trophic Cascade, documented by ecologist William Ripple and his colleagues at Oregon State University beginning in the 1990s, became one of the most cited examples of ecological complexity in modern science. It demonstrated something that ecological theory had suggested but never proven at this scale: that apex predators are not simply consumers at the top of a food chain, they are architects of the ecosystems they inhabit. Their presence or absence shapes everything below them. The implications extend far beyond Yellowstone. Across the world, apex predators have been removed from ecosystems through hunting, habitat loss, and human expansion. Sharks removed from coastal waters produce explosions in ray populations that devastate shellfish beds. Lions removed from African savannas produce increases in baboon populations that destroy crops and spread disease into human communities. Sea otters removed from kelp forest ecosystems produce sea urchin population explosions that consume kelp forests entirely, replacing one of the ocean's most productive ecosystems with bare rock. Every removal follows the same logic as Yellowstone in reverse. Take out the predator, the prey population expands or changes behavior. Vegetation changes, water systems change, other species collapse or explode. The cascade runs downward through the system, and the landscape that emerges bears almost no resemblance to the one the predator had maintained. What ecology has learned from Yellowstone is that natural systems are not collections of independent species occupying the same space. They are networks of relationships, many of them invisible, many of them operating through fear and behavior rather than direct consumption. The wolf shapes the elk shapes the vegetation shapes the river shapes the fish shapes the bird. Remove one node from the network and the effects travel in every direction simultaneously, producing outcomes nobody predicted, and some that cannot be reversed. In 2023, Yellowstone's wolf population stood at approximately 108 individuals across 10 packs. The recovery is documented, measured, ongoing. The rivers are different from what they were in 1994. The vegetation is different. The bird populations are different. The beaver populations are different. The ecosystem is not restored to some historical baseline.
Ecosystems do not have baselines, they have states, each one the product of the species currently present. But it is measurably more complex, more stable, and more productive than it was during the 70 wolf-free years. 14 wolves released into a landscape that had forgotten them changed a river. Not by touching it, by existing near it, by reactivating in the elk a fear that 70 years of absence had allowed to go dormant, by being present in the calculation that every prey animal runs constantly. Where is safe? Where is dangerous? Where can I stand still, and where must I keep moving? The river didn't know the wolves were back. The elk did, and that was enough. The question Yellowstone leaves open is not whether apex predators matter. That is settled. The question is how many systems are currently running in the degraded state Yellowstone ran in from 1926 to 1995, missing a predator, slowly losing complexity, slowly simplifying toward a less stable version of what they were, and whether the cascade can be reversed in time. Some of them can. The evidence from Yellowstone says so. Some of them have already passed the point where reintroduction would work. The species are gone. The knowledge of how to behave in their presence is gone from the prey populations. The vegetation that supported the cascade is gone. The river has already changed into something that cannot change back. The wolves at Yellowstone came back just in time. In most places, they haven't come back at all.